I plan lessons as thoroughly as I possibly can to make sure that they're successful. Yeah, probably in the shower actually.
Planning the journey that you're going to take with the children.
A lesson plan is a plan for what you're going to do during the lesson. I'll get more intelligent as we go on, I'm warming up.
Let go of the lesson plan of where you want things to be, because sometimes they'll do that lesson plan and more in a lesson, and sometimes they won't even get past what you'd thought was the starter.
I remember when I was at school, the worst thing that you could do is say, right children, let's get your books out, we're going to start on page 42, and they turn off straight away. You look around the class and you've got half of them asleep.
There is no such thing as a good beginning, a good end, a good middle to a lesson. It completely depends on the purpose, on the objective of the lesson.
Sometimes I won't even wait for all the children to enter the classroom so that as they enter, we're actually up and ready doing it, so the children know they've come into a room where learning's about to take place.
Sometimes a starter should be inspirational.
Whether it's a chant, a rhyme, a rap.
So for example, if it's creative writing, I could come in role.
Sometimes a starter should be puzzling.
Magical mystery items in boxes that we pull out.
I mean, there is no such thing as the only perfect starter.
I've only been head teacher for 13 years, don't know what chunking is.
I wouldn't necessarily term it chunking, but yeah, I do. When I go in, I think about, right, what's the first part going to be, and what's the next part of the lesson, and definitely it's a sequence moving through different parts.
Well, chunking, breaking the lessons down into small compartmental bits are really important, because you need to assess where the children are getting to.
I always think, right, where do I want to get to? What do I want the majority of my children to know, and how am I going to get there? So if it means breaking it down into little chunks and having little mini plenaries throughout the lesson, that's a really good way forward.
And I try and vary through each part the sort of setup that the children have, so where they're going to be in the room, what sort of size group they might be working with, whether they're going to move round, all those sorts of things. So you definitely do plan it in sections, really. I teach 2-year groups mixed up, so we have a huge range of children. Even in 1-year group we have a huge range of children, but over 2 it becomes a much wider range. So you do have to, you know, plan for all those different learners.
The way you speak to them, the way you question them, I mean, everything really informs the way you differentiate.
I find using, thinking about the success criteria really helpful for planning for different abilities. So I'll think about what my objective is, then think about what do I want the children to achieve by the end of the lesson, and using a must, should, could method.
I have a group of boys in particular who do not like to sit on the carpet and listen. So when they came into my class last year, I really had to adapt how I worked and make sure that my lessons were more active and more engaging with the children, making sure that they were involved. So, you know, you have to adapt to the sort of children that you've got.
And obviously I've got children who find writing difficult, or who just want to speak it and have it written, somebody to scribe for them. And, you know, that's absolutely fine. That would be planned in, not all the time, but at some point, so they know that what they're capable of saying has been written in a way that displays their ability.
End the lesson. Okay.
Sometimes you can end them with a question, sometimes you can end them with a recap, sometimes you can end them with children explaining what they were doing.
I always really like to do a bit of a taster of the next lesson, a bit like they do at the end of TV programmes really, where they give you like clips of what's going to happen next week.
Okay, so for example, if we've done a bit of spelling and I've been teaching them how to spell a particular word, maybe earlier on in the lesson, we might finish with that word. So for example, vegetables, and I'll sing them a little song about my favourite veggie tables. My favourite vegetables.
I find that you can think a lot about whiz-bang activities for your plenary, but the most important thing is to link it back to what you've been actually covering in the lesson. So sometimes simple is best.
The children will all be sitting there in front of you, and you'll be finishing off with a final song, a final round, and one by one you'll gradually point to the children or to a group of children, and that'll be their turn to gradually leave the classroom quickly and quietly while the rest of the children carry on singing, so the noise gradually dies down as the children leave until it's just you left singing. And no, I'm not going to sing anymore.
Hooks. Do I plan for those?
I do have a collection of one-off lessons that I probably pull out every fortnight, every 3 weeks, that takes the children on a journey.
I try to hook the children in by asking interesting questions, perhaps choosing a text that I know they will find interesting for literacy, and that comes with knowing your class.
I had a child who was fascinated by sharks, and sadly I didn't realise that until quite late on in the year, but I could have done anything to do with sharks and that child would have, his eyes would have lit up, and he would have done maths and science and everything. He would have written 4 pages on it, whereas he really struggled with literacy.
I like to have, you know, a bit of fun in there and show the children examples of, if I've done something, I quite like to write things myself. They love it, listening about you and what you've done and your bit of writing.
A lesson that I did a few days ago, I pretended I was a secret agent, and I wasn't in the classroom, and I had a remote control, and the kids went in, they weren't sure, they all sat down, and I managed to turn on the DVD with me on it, and my face popped up, and basically it said, you know, children, sit down, I want you to listen, I'm a secret agent, I've been working in the school for so long, and it just takes them on that journey. And they actually believe in it, it's fantastic.
They need to know what you're looking for. It's all very well to say, oh, that was a brilliant story, or, you know, why was it a brilliant story? What is it that's made my story brilliant? They need to know the things that you're looking for, those sort of steps.
And I would always discuss that at the beginning of the lesson with the children. Do they understand what the learning objective is? What do they understand the learning objective to be? And then if there's any misconception at the outset, you can clear that up before we've spent the whole lesson with them on the wrong track.
And what we do at the beginning of term is discuss all the objectives and discuss all the key words. Yeah? So teachers are okay with that from the beginning of the term. Yeah? Once that's discussed, we actually plot that into our, onto our system so that when teachers are planning, they've got the profile of objectives and keywords already established.
And I think it is important that they know, you know, okay, if you haven't met that objective, that's okay, we'll do some more work on it, it'll come back around. And it gives them a point to the lesson, you know, why are we trying to find all the different ways you can make a snake out of 3 cubes, you know, what's the point? And I think they really need to know what the point is so they can see that the teaching and the learning is meaningful for them.
Planning progression is looking at what the children have achieved during the day, looking at their work, thinking about back over their responses from the lesson, and thinking about what I need to teach them next.
I try and see where the ideal...
This is like a job interview. When planning for progression, I'll make sure that I try to take stock of where the children are at the end of a lesson, perhaps using simple techniques like the thermometer, getting them to tell you, yes, I understand.
Because we do all start with what is the lesson objective. We all start at the end. Where do we want the children to be?
I'm getting there.
So it's about thinking back and understanding what skills, what knowledge, what understanding.
And no, I don't understand what you're saying at all.
What practice do they need to have had in order to be successful?
So you can therefore know whether it's time to take your children on to the next stage or whether to reinforce what you've covered in the current lesson.
And through that, you then plan the progression that gets them to where they ideally would be. quite a substantial part of my lesson plan writing is spent reflecting on what happened before, because it's about understanding where the children were or are, and then taking it from there.
Any good learning that's taken place and anything that's really stuck in the children's minds is something that I will use again, I will write down, and I will put away into a folder.
And there's things that, you know, I do lessons all the time and I think, oh, that would have been so obvious, why didn't I think of doing that earlier, you know, and jot it down ready for next time. In
terms of things that don't go so well, I definitely remember those things, and those things tend to be placed on the back burner and probably not used again. So yeah, it's this sort of plan, do and review cycle. As a teacher, I don't think that ever goes away. Yeah, time management is really important when planning a lesson. It's something that if you don't get that right, you tend not to hit your learning objective.
For me, in my class, in an hours of teaching, my starter would take about 10 to 15 minutes, the main activity about 30 minutes, and the wrap-up, again, 10 to 15 minutes long.
Getting the pace right so that the children have the pace right, having just the right amount of work to do.
When you sit down and start measuring your activities, and I think it's important on your lesson plan to actually allocate time and stick to that time.
And for those children who finish very, very quickly, you know, having an extension activity, yeah, so that it's not just an add-on, but something which is going to develop their notion of what they've just done.
So yeah, vital that you get your activity management, your time management for those activities spot on, and that you measure your time within that lesson. Because if you get it wrong, it can go quite pear-shaped.
Things go wrong with lesson plans.
What can go wrong with a lesson plan?
Things go wrong. You know, divert off, do something else, stop the lesson.
You know, you've overplanned, you've planned at a level which is much higher, or you've planned at a level that's much lower.
It can fail totally if people stick to it, ironically.
If you try and plan too much to do in the time allocated, it can go disastrously wrong. You're trying to fit it in, it's not working, and if you then stick rigidly to it, things will go wrong very badly.
You initially have a fear that you can't be that flexible, but I've learned you've got to be. You've got to take the curriculum the way the children take you, because actually they have a lot to offer it too. So let them do some of the work.
And I remember in my own circumstance, having never taught infant children before, about 13 years ago, going into a reception classroom and doing these massive amounts of planning, which I thought were quite immaculate, only to find when I delivered it, the children finished the lesson within 2 seconds, and I had a huge line of children in front of me saying, what do I do next?
If things aren't going right, who's going to judge you for coming away from your lesson plan to make that lesson quality for them and to ensure that that learning takes place?